Chapter 1. Rain over Lake Biwa. The rain began before the boat reached the shore. Not a gentle spring rain, but the kind that falls with purpose. Heavy drops that strike the lake and vanish at once, as if the water swallows every sound. Lake Biwa lay wide and dark under a sky the color of wet ink. The wind pulled long lines across the surface, and the air smelled of cold water, old wood, and distant pine. Kanzaki Reijiro stood at the edge of the ferry deck, coat collar raised, hat brim low. He did not look like a man traveling for pleasure. He looked like someone who had learned to keep his eyes open, even when his body begged for sleep. He was 32, a private investigator, though he rarely used those words. They sounded too proud, too sharp. He preferred observer, a man who listened, a man who measured. The ferry bumped the pier with a tired groan. A lantern swung on a hook above the landing, throwing weak light into the rain. Someone on shore shouted directions, but the words were shredded by wind and distance. The road from the pier was already turning to mud. A small cart waited under a wooden awning. The driver, wrapped in straw cape, bowed quickly. "Ryokan Mori," he said. "It's close." Close. In weather like this, close could still mean far. Kanzaki climbed in. The cart wheels rolled and splashed, and soon the world became shadows, bent trees, low fences, roofs disappearing behind sheets of rain. The ryokan appeared suddenly, like a patient old animal sitting in the storm. It was larger than it looked from the road. A traditional wooden building with deep eaves, dark beams, and a tiled roof that shone with water. Behind the main structure, smaller wings stretched back like hidden arms. Corridors turned in angles that did not make sense at first glance. It was the kind of building that kept secrets simply by being old. A stone lantern stood in the garden. Its flame flickered, almost ashamed of its own weakness. At the entrance, a young woman waited with an umbrella and a practiced smile. She bowed with perfect timing, the way people do when they've done it 1,000 times. "Welcome to Ryokan Mori," she said. "Please, step inside quickly." Her voice was calm and clear, as if the storm had no right to touch it. Kanzaki wiped rain from his sleeve and entered. The warmth of the interior wrapped around him at once. Soft heat, the faint scent of tatami and cedar, and the quiet presence of simmering tea somewhere far inside. The young woman took his name, noted it carefully, and handed him a small key tag. "Asano Fumiko," she introduced herself. "I'm helping at the front desk, while my aunt manages the inn." She was 22. Maybe younger in the face, but her eyes were not young. They were sharp, quick, and too aware of people's moods. Her gaze lingered on Kanzaki's soaked coat, the worn leather of his bag, the way he held himself like a man who didn't relax even when invited. "Storm's getting stronger," she added gently. "The ferry may stop for the night." "A closed circle," Kanzaki muttered without meaning to. Fumiko blinked. "Pardon?" "Nothing." Kanzaki gave a small, polite smile. "Just talking to myself." 2 other guests were checking in. One of them was impossible to miss. A traveling salesman in a wet suit, cheeks red from drink and cold, laughing too loudly at his own jokes as he argued with the driver about luggage fees. "Unbelievable," he said, waving his hands. "This weather is personally insulting." Fumiko's smile remained steady, but Kanzaki noticed the slight tightening near her eyes. "Arakawa Shinso," she whispered quietly as she passed Kanzaki his room slip. "He arrived an hour ago, and has been loud ever since." The other guest was the opposite. A woman in a dark coat with a subtle pattern, hair pinned neatly, gloved hands holding a lacquer box like it contained something fragile. She moved slowly, carefully, with the calm grace of someone used to being watched. Her name, written in the ledger, was Tachibana Misako. She bowed with proper politeness, but her eyes flicked once toward Kanzaki, measuring him in a single breath, then away again. Then came the fourth guest. He entered so quietly, Kanzaki almost didn't notice him at first. A young man, late 20s, thin build, plain coat, nothing expensive, nothing careless. But his movements were precise. His umbrella was folded neatly, water shaken off in the correct place. His shoes were aligned perfectly in the entrance, toes facing outward. A cautious man. He approached the desk with the quiet of someone who didn't want attention, and yet every few seconds his gaze returned to the hallway corners, the side doors, the servants' passage leading deeper into the building. Fumiko wrote his name, Sakakibara Jun. His occupation, written plainly, was government clerk, but Kanzaki had seen clerks before. Most of them carried exhaustion, or pride, or boredom. Sakakibara carried care, the kind of care a person carries when something important is close to their skin. As Sakakibara accepted his room slip, he asked in a low voice, "The rooms, do they lock from inside?" Fumiko nodded. "Yes." "Each has an inner latch." "Good." He hesitated, then asked another question. "And at night, is there patrol?" "A watchman checks the corridors," she said, "for fire safety." Sakakibara's shoulders lowered a fraction, the smallest release of tension. "Thank you." He bowed and walked away without looking back. Kanzaki watched him go and felt something cold settle inside his chest. Not fear, but the familiar weight of possibility. A man like that was not running from the storm. He was hiding inside it. Fumiko led Kanzaki down the corridor to his room. The hallway floors were polished wood, dark and damp at the edges from wet socks and hurried footsteps. Lanterns burned in wall niches, their light low and soft. Each flame made shadows that moved slightly, as if the building breathed. The corridors bent, turned, narrowed, opened again. "This place is bigger than it looks," Kanzaki said. Fumiko nodded. "It was rebuilt many times. Some parts are older than others. The servants use back passages so they don't disturb guests." A perfect house for vanishing, Kanzaki thought. His room was modest. Tatami mats, a low table, a scroll in the alcove, a faint smell of fresh straw and cedar. Outside the paper window, rain rattled in endless rhythm. Fumiko left quietly. Kanzaki set his bag down and listened. The inn had its own sounds, distant footsteps, the soft clack of wooden sandals, a kettle somewhere sighing. And always the rain, steady, hypnotic, like fingers tapping a secret code on the roof tiles. He did not unpack immediately. Instead, he sat, poured himself tea from the small pot provided, and watched the steam curl upward. The warmth was pleasant. The quiet was almost kind. Almost. Because even in comfort, Kanzaki's mind did what it always did. It observed. The ryokan was old, yes, but it was also maintained. Someone cared for it. Someone polished the floors and kept the lanterns lit. Someone trimmed the wicks so the flames stayed strong. And beyond that care, Kanzaki felt something else. A tension under the calm surface. A thread pulled too tight. The storm outside was sealing the world shut. Boats stopped, roads drowning in mud, telegraph wires trembling in the wind. No one would arrive. No one would leave easily. A closed circle, indeed. He took a slow sip of tea. Then, somewhere far down the corridor, a door slid shut with a soft wooden click. Not loud, not alarming, but in a place made of paper walls and silence, Even a small sound could feel like a signal. Kanzaki set the cup down. He stared at the shoji door of his room, at the wooden frame, at the simple latch, and without knowing why, without any reason at all, he reached out and tested it once. Then, after a pause, he tested it again. Outside, the rain continued its patient song. Inside the ryokan, people settled into their rooms, some to rest, some to drink, some to dream. And one, quiet Sakakibara Jun, to prepare for a night the storm would later hide. Chapter 2. Matsu-no-ma. At 9:30, the storm deepened. The rain no longer fell straight down. It came at an angle, pushed hard by the wind, striking the roof tiles like handfuls of thrown gravel. Somewhere above the ceiling, water rushed through hidden channels, an unseen river flowing over old wood. Sakakibara Jun walked the corridor toward Matsu-no-ma with measured steps. He did not rush. Rushing made noise. Noise attracted attention. The corridor bent twice before reaching the lakeside wing. Lanterns hung at even intervals, their flames steady but low. The light softened the edges of everything, walls, doors, even faces. It was the kind of light that forgave mistakes. Sakakibara did not trust it. He stopped once, just long enough to glance back. No one followed. Satisfied, he slid open the door to Matsu-no-ma and stepped inside. The room smelled clean. Fresh tatami, faint incense, old wood warmed by earlier guests. The tokonoma alcove held a simple hanging scroll, ink mountains, half lost in mist. A vase stood beneath it, empty. Sakakibara set his travel bag beside the wall. He removed his coat, folded it carefully, and placed it on top. Shoes aligned, sandals set neatly by the door, wallet placed inside the bag, pocket watch beside it, chain coiled just so, everything in its place. The veranda doors were shut tight. Beyond them, Lake Biwa was invisible, erased by darkness and rain. Sakakibara slid the inner latch of the shoji door into place, then paused. He checked it again. The wooden bar rested firmly in its groove. Only then did he allow himself to breathe. He knelt by the low table and opened his bag. Not fully, only enough to slip his hand inside a false lining. His fingers touched folded paper, smooth and thin. He did not take it out. He did not look. Instead, he closed the bag and retied the cord. Outside the room, the ryokan lived quietly, a soft cough somewhere. Footsteps fading, a distant laugh, Arakawa, no doubt, already drinking again. At 10 o'clock, there was a polite knock. "Tea!" came a woman's voice. Sakakibara rose at once and slid the door open a hand's width. Yamane Toki stood there, tray balanced expertly, her expression unreadable. "Thank you," Sakakibara said. Her eyes flicked past him into the room, not rude, not curious, habitual. She placed the tray on the table and bowed. "The storm may last all night," she said. "If you need anything, please call." "I won't," Sakakibara replied gently. "But thank you." Yamane paused, as if she wanted to say something more. Then she turned and went on her way, her footsteps soft and even. Sakakibara closed the door. He sat and poured tea. The steam rose slowly, carrying a faint bitterness that cleared his head. He drank carefully, listening. The rain, the wind, the building breathing. Minutes passed. Then more. At some point, he could not later remember exactly when, he rose and crossed the room. He knelt near the tokonoma, fingers pressing lightly against the edge of the tatami. The mat shifted. Only a little. Just enough. He stilled, listening again. No footsteps, No voices. From within his sleeve, he took out a thin cord, no thicker than thread. He tested its strength once, then tucked it away. Somewhere in the corridor, a lantern hissed softly. Someone had trimmed its wick recently. Too recently. At 11:15, a sound cut through the rain. Not loud, not clear. A sharp cry, or perhaps just the wind forcing itself through a narrow gap. Arakawa would later swear it was a man's voice. Others would say it was nothing at all. Inside Matsu-no-ma, Sakakibara stood perfectly still, breath held, eyes fixed on the door. The sound did not come again. At 11:30, the corridor watchman passed the room. He paused, listening, then moved on. No light leaked from beneath the door. No shadow crossed the paper walls. Inside, the tea had gone cold. Sakakibara moved one last time. He straightened the table. He checked the latch. He looked once more at the belongings he would not take with him. Then he stepped into the darkness near the tokonoma, where the tatami lifted just enough for a careful man. The storm swallowed the rest. By morning, Matsu-no-ma would be silent. The door would be latched from the inside, the window closed, the room untouched. And Sakakibara Jun, quiet government clerk, cautious to the end, would be nowhere in the world the rain could point to. Chapter 3. The Sealed Room. Morning arrived without brightness. The storm had not ended. It had only grown tired. The rain softened from violent strikes into a steady, patient fall. Mist hung low over the garden stones, turning the ryokan into an island floating in grey. Inside, the air smelled of damp wood and charcoal. Breakfast should have brought normal sounds, trays sliding, quiet greetings, the soft clink of porcelain. But the dining room of Ryokan Mori felt strangely uneven, like a song missing its last note. Asano Fumiko moved between tables with practiced grace, placing bowls of rice and miso soup, pouring tea, answering polite requests. Her face stayed calm, but her eyes kept returning to the empty space near the window. One seat remained untouched. Sakakibara-jun had not appeared. Arakawa Shinzo, already awake and already noisy, slurped loudly and laughed at nothing in particular. "Government clerks," he announced, waving his chopsticks as if addressing an audience. "They live like shadows, probably slipped out early to avoid conversation." Lady Tachibana Misako smiled faintly, polite as lacquer, and ate with small, perfect bites. She said nothing, but she listened. Kanzaki Reijiro sat apart from the others, facing the corridor entrance. He drank tea slowly and watched. A man like Sakakibara did not oversleep, not after checking a latch twice, not after asking about patrols. At last, Okame Mori Chio appeared. She moved with quiet authority, her kimono immaculate, her hair pinned in the strict style of a woman who could control a room without raising her voice. Fumiko leaned toward her and whispered. Chio's expression did not change, but her eyes sharpened. The kind of look that said, "Not here, not in front of guests." She turned smoothly. "Please enjoy your breakfast," she said to the room. "The weather is unkind, but we will keep you comfortable." She bowed and withdrew, Fumiko following behind. Kanzaki rose. Not quickly, not dramatically. He simply stood, as if remembering something he'd forgotten, and walked toward the corridor at a measured pace. Fumiko met him at the hallway corner. Her hands were folded tightly in front of her. "He hasn't answered," she said quietly. "We knocked 3 times. "Which room?" Kanzaki already knew the answer, but detective habits were like breathing. "Matsu-no-ma." Chio stood a few steps behind, listening. Yamane Toki was there too, stiff and watchful, her lips pressed into a hard line. "It may be nothing," Chio said, though her tone did not believe her own words. "He could be ill." "He could," Kanzaki agreed. "But you're here, so you're not sure." Yamane's eyes flashed. "Guests sleep deeply sometimes, especially when they arrive late." "Of course," Kanzaki said, calm as rainwater. "Then we will confirm." Chio nodded once. "We will enter together." They walked toward the lakeside wing. The corridors were quieter now than they had been the night before. Lantern light still burned, weak against the grey morning. Outside, the rain stroked the roof tiles with a constant whisper. When they reached Matsu-no-ma, the hallway seemed colder. Fumiko knocked again. Gently. Properly. "Sakakibara-sama," she called. "It's morning. Breakfast has been served." Silence. Yamane stepped forward and knocked harder. "Sakakibara-sama." Nothing. Chio inhaled slowly, the breath of someone preparing for trouble. "We will open," she said. Yamane slid her fingers beneath the edge of the shoji door and stopped. Her eyes narrowed. She tried again. The door did not move. "The latch," Yamane murmured. "It's locked?" Fumiko's voice cracked just slightly. Yamane's mouth tightened. "From the inside." For a brief moment, the 4 of them stood listening to the rain. The air in the corridor suddenly felt too thin. Chiyo turned to Kanzaki. "There is a spare key." Kanzaki shook his head gently. "Not for an inner latch." Yamane looked offended, as if the very idea was an insult to the inn's dignity. "There is no trick," she said. "Our rooms lock properly." Kanzaki did not argue. He only crouched and examined the frame. No splintering, no forced entry. The paper panels were unbroken. No tears, no signs of struggle. A locked room. Not metaphorically, not dramatically. Literally. Chiyo lifted her sleeve to cover her mouth for a moment. More habit than fear. "This cannot be happening," she whispered. Kanzaki placed his palm flat against the shoji. "Is there another way in?" Fumiko answered, too quickly. "Only the veranda." Yamane added, "But the veranda doors are shut, and you would hear them open." Kanzaki looked down the corridor. "Then we must enter from the veranda." Chiyo nodded once, sharp. "Do it." They walked outside through the side passage. The garden stones were slick with rain. Water gathered in shallow pools, reflecting nothing but grey sky. When they reached the veranda of Matsu-no-ma, Fumiko's breath caught. The wooden rail was wet, darkened with water. The veranda doors, 2 sliding panels, were closed. Not just closed, properly aligned, as if a careful person had shut them with intention. Yamane knelt and placed her hands against the wood. She slid one panel aside. It opened without resistance. Cold air spilled into the room like a quiet wave. Chiyo stepped in first, as an owner should. She moved with dignity even now, but Kanzaki saw the tension in her shoulders, the small stiffness in her hands. The room was dim. Grey daylight filtered through paper walls. The air was still, too still, and the room was perfect. Tatami clean, table centered, teapot and cup arranged neatly, futon folded in its place as if the guest never lay down. The scroll in the tokonoma hung straight, its ink mountains untouched by human breath. Kanzaki's eyes moved instantly to the corner. A travel bag sat where it should, cord tied. Beside it, sandals, aligned. On top of the folded coat, a wallet. Next to the bag, placed like a deliberate offering, a pocket watch, face upward, chain looped in a careful curve. All belongings remained. But Sakakibara-jun did not. Fumiko stepped forward, staring at the empty tatami as if waiting for the man to rise from it. This isn't possible," she whispered. Yamane rushed to the closet and slid it open. Empty. She checked behind the hanging scroll. Nothing. She dropped to her knees and looked under the futon. Nothing. Chiyo stood very still, her eyes scanning the room like a soldier surveying a battlefield she never wanted to enter. "He didn't leave," she said quietly. "He disappeared." Harakawa's laughter echoed faintly from the dining hall in the distance, wrong and out of place, as if another world continued without understanding what had changed. Kanzaki walked to the shoji door from the inside and stared at the latch. It was in place, firm, locked, from inside. He turned and looked back at the room again, not as a guest, not as a man looking for someone, but as a mind looking for an answer. This was not chaos. It was staged order, a room arranged to tell a story that said, "I was taken, I was stolen, I was erased." But Kanzaki's eyes narrowed slightly, because the very neatness of the scene felt intentional, too clean, too polite, like an apology written in perfect handwriting. Fumiko's voice trembled. "What do we do?" Chiyo swallowed. For the first time, the dignified Okami allowed a crack to show in her calm. "If word spreads," she said softly, "this ryokan will be ruined." Yamane snapped. We call the police. Chiyo's gaze flicked to her, sharp. And tell them a guest vanished from a room locked from the inside, with all his belongings untouched? The silence that followed was heavy. Outside, rain continued its endless tapping. Inside, the room waited like a closed fist. Kanzaki spoke at last, voice low and even. Before we call anyone, he said, we look carefully. He stepped forward and knelt at the edge of the tatami, close to the tokonoma alcove. His fingers hovered just above the straw surface. The smallest thing caught his eye. A tatami seam, not torn. Chapter 4. What the room refused to say. Kanzaki did not touch the tatami seam. Not yet. He shifted his weight back onto his heels and let the room speak in its own quiet language. Rooms, he believed, told the truth when people stopped interrupting them. The rain softened, then resumed, like breath taken and released. Somewhere in the inn, porcelain clicked. Life continued, politely ignoring the impossible. Please, Chiyo said at last, her voice controlled but tight. Look carefully. But discreetly. Kanzaki nodded. Of course. He began with distance. From the doorway, the room looked calm. Too calm. No disorder, no panic. The kind of calm that asked to be trusted. He let his eyes move slowly, left to right, as if reading a page. The tokonoma first. Scroll straight, cord aligned, vase empty, dust undisturbed. Then the low table. Teapot lid set correctly. Cup centered. Tea long gone cold. Tea at 10, Kanzaki murmured, mostly to himself. Fumiko heard him. Yes. Yamane-san delivered it. Yamane's jaw tightened. I did. He answered the door himself. Did he seem ill? Kanzaki asked. No, she said. Alert, polite. Polite. Always polite. Kanzaki moved closer to the bag. He did not open it. He did not need to. The cord was tied in a neat, practiced knot. Not rushed, not careless. A man who plans does not rush. He picked up the pocket watch. Heavy, solid. The glass uncracked. The hands frozen at just past 11. Was it running? Fumiko asked. Yes, Kanzaki said, and someone stopped it. Chiyo frowned. Or it broke. Kanzaki shook his head gently. No, a broken watch lies differently. He set it back exactly where it had been. Then he turned toward the closet. When Yamane had slid it open earlier, she had done so quickly, almost angrily. Now Kanzaki opened it slowly. The smell reached him first. Not strong, not unpleasant. Lake water. And something else. Sharp, clean, medicinal. Camphor, he said. Fumiko leaned closer. We use it to protect fabric. Yes, Kanzaki agreed, but not usually enough to mix with water. Yamane stiffened. The storm could have carried the smell. Into a closed closet, Kanzaki asked mildly. She did not answer. He crouched again, closer to the floor now, and studied the tatami near the tokonoma. The seam he had noticed before was subtle, almost shy. To most eyes it would mean nothing. To Kanzaki, it meant choice. Someone had pressed here. Recently. He pressed down lightly with 2 fingers. The mat shifted, just a breath. Beneath it, darkness. Not deep, not empty. A space. Fumiko inhaled sharply. There's something under there. A gap, Kanzaki said, or a lie. He stood and looked toward the veranda doors. Rain streaked the wood outside. Water ran down the glassless panels in thin, trembling lines. Who cleaned the veranda last night? He asked. Yamane answered immediately. No one. Not during the storm. Kanzaki slid one door open a hand's width and stepped out. The rain brushed his sleeve at once. He crouched by the railing. There, caught on a splinter of old wood, was a single dark thread. Thin, strong, out of place. He did not pull it free. He simply noted it. Behind him, Chiyo spoke in a low voice. "This is dangerous ground, Kanzaki-san." He turned. "For the inn?" "For everyone," she said. He met her gaze. "Then we must be precise." They returned inside. Kanzaki closed the veranda door gently, aligning it as he had found it. "Has anyone been on the roof recently?" he asked. Yamane hesitated. It was small, almost invisible. But Kanzaki saw it. "Kobayashi," she said at last. "Yesterday afternoon, checking tiles before the storm." "Is he still here?" Kanzaki asked. "Yes," Chiyo said. "In the storage wing." Kanzaki nodded. "We will speak to him later." He looked once more at the room, now filled with unspoken questions. "Nothing here says violence," he said quietly. "No struggle. No haste." Fumiko whispered, "Then where did he go?" Kanzaki did not answer immediately. Instead, he walked back to the shoji door and examined the latch from the inside. A simple wooden bar, worn smooth by decades of hands. He traced the frame with his eyes. There, near the joint, was a tiny knot hole, barely noticeable, barely big enough for a cord. He said nothing. Not yet. From the corridor came a sudden, loud voice. "I told you I heard something," Arakawa shouted, "pacing, like someone walking back and forth." His voice echoed, sloppy with certainty. Chiyo closed her eyes for a brief second. Kanzaki straightened. "The room does not accuse anyone," he said softly. "But it does not tell the whole truth either." He stepped aside, giving the space one last long look. "This room was meant to be found like this," he continued. "Clean. Locked. Convincing." Fumiko swallowed. "Convincing of what?" Kanzaki looked at the empty tatami, where a man should have been. "Of disappearance," he said, "not of escape." Outside, the rain resumed its steady rhythm, patient and relentless, and somewhere within the old bones of the ryokan, the building kept its silence. For now. Chapter 5. Whispers in the corridor. The corridor outside Matsu-no-ma felt narrower than before. It was the same width, the same polished boards, the same lanterns. But after seeing the empty room, the hallway seemed to lean inward, listening. Kanzaki walked first. Chiyo followed, Fumiko half a step behind, Yamane bringing up the rear like a silent guard. They did not speak. The ryokan had ears. At the first corner, Arakawa Shinzo was waiting, arms folded, expression smug in the way only a man who believed himself important could manage. "So?" he asked, lowering his voice only slightly. "Did he vanish into thin air?" Fumiko stopped. "Please keep your voice down." Arakawa grinned. "This place is all whispers anyway. People will talk." "Let them talk later," Kanzaki said, calmly. Arakawa blinked. He hadn't expected the quiet man from breakfast to address him. "You're a guest too," Arakawa said. "Why do you care?" Kanzaki tilted his head. "Because mysteries dislike being ignored." Arakawa laughed, but it was thinner than before. "Well, I heard someone pacing last night, around 11, near the lakeside wing." "Pacing how?" Kanzaki asked. "Slow steps, back and forth, like someone thinking." He tapped his temple. Then a sharp sound, a shout, maybe. "Could it have been the wind?" Yamane asked sharply. Arakawa shrugged. "Everything could be the wind. But I've heard wind before." "This sounded human." Kanzaki nodded once. "Thank you." They left him in the corridor, still enjoying his own performance. Further down, Lady Tachibana Misako stood near a window, looking out at the rain. Her lacquer box rested in her hands, like a sleeping animal. She turned as they approached. "Good morning," she said softly. "Good morning," Chiyo replied. "I'm afraid we have a small inconvenience." Misako's eyes flickered. "I heard." "The young man from last night?" "Yes," Kanzaki said. "Did you notice anything unusual?" Misako considered. Her expression did not change, but her fingers tightened slightly on the box. "The storm was loud," she said, "but I thought I heard someone moving on the roof." "On the roof?" Fumiko repeated. "Yes, footsteps above the ceiling, but I assumed it was the wind, or tiles shifting." Kanzaki bowed slightly. "Thank you. That is useful." Misako studied him for a moment, then nodded and walked away, her steps soundless on the wood. When she was gone, Yamane whispered, "She's strange." "Everyone is strange," Kanzaki said. "Some just hide it better." They reached the storage wing, where the smell of old tools and damp wood replaced incense. Kobayashi Genzo was there, repairing a shutter with slow, practiced movements. He looked up when they entered. "Morning," he said. "Storm did a number on the east roof." "Kobayashi-san," Chiyo said. "We need to ask you something." He wiped his hands on his trousers. "Of course." "Were you on the roof last night?" Kanzaki asked. Kobayashi hesitated, a beat too long. "No," he said. "Yesterday afternoon only, before dinner." "Did anyone go up after that?" Kanzaki asked. Kobayashi scratched his cheek. "Not that I know." "Are there ways to move through the building unseen?" Kanzaki asked lightly. Kobayashi chuckled. "This place is old. Too many ways. Servants' passages, storage gaps, crawl spaces." Yamane's eyes snapped to him. He stopped speaking. Chiyo looked displeased. "Genzo." He bowed his head. "Just old architecture." Kanzaki thanked him and turned back toward the main corridor. As they walked, Fumiko whispered, "He knows more." "He knows history," Kanzaki said. "History is always inconvenient." They returned to the central hall. Guests moved quietly now, voices lowered, glances exchanged. Rumors were already forming, invisible but alive. Chiyo stopped at the foot of the stairs. "This cannot become a scandal," she said quietly. "Our guests come for peace." Kanzaki looked at the ceiling, then at the corridor that led back to Matsu-no-ma. "Peace," he said, "is often just silence arranged carefully." Fumiko watched him. "And what is this?" Kanzaki met her eyes. "This," he said, "is a room that was arranged to lie." The rain tapped the roof like patient fingers, counting time no one could see. And somewhere above the tatami, above the corridors, above the quiet people pretending nothing was wrong, something had moved in the night. Chapter 6. The Shape of a Lie. Kanzaki asked for time, not loudly, not formally. He simply said it, the way one asks for hot water or a towel. "I would like to look once more," he told Chiyo, "alone, just for a little while." Chiyo hesitated. The inn was already off balance. Leaving a guest alone in the vanished man's room felt improper. But she nodded. "Fumiko will stay nearby," she said, "in case." Kanzaki bowed. "That's enough." Matsu-no-ma greeted him the same way it had before, quiet, polite, falsely innocent. He slid the shoji door shut behind him and stood still, letting the room close around his senses. The sound of rain softened. The smell of tatami returned. The air felt held. He began again, slowly, as if the room were a puzzle that punished impatience. This time he crouched immediately by the latch. From the inside, it was unremarkable. A simple wooden bar, darkened by hands and years. Kanzaki ran his fingers along the frame, feeling for splinters, gaps, resistance. Then he saw it again. The knot hole. Tiny. Natural. Easy to ignore. He took out a thin cord from his coat pocket, his own, used for tying files. He threaded it through the hole with care, looping it around the bar. With a gentle pull, the latch slid into place. From the outside, the door would appear locked from within. Kanzaki exhaled slowly. "So that's how you closed the circle," he murmured. He reset the latch and stepped back, not smiling. Cleverness was not something to admire blindly. Cleverness could be kind, or cruel. He turned his attention to the floor. The tatami near the tokonoma was the heart of the room's false calm. He pressed again, firmer this time. The mat yielded with a quiet breath. He lifted the corner. Beneath it was a narrow wooden panel, darker than the rest. Old. Recently disturbed. He did not open it. Not yet. Instead, he stood and walked the perimeter of the room, counting steps, measuring distance, noting how the sound of his footfall changed near the alcove. Hollow. He stopped at the veranda doors. Rain streaked the wood outside. He crouched again and examined the rail. The thread was still there. He pinched it gently between his fingers. Strong. Treated. Not silk, not cotton. Utility thread. Someone had used it with intention. A sudden knock broke the stillness. Kanzaki straightened at once. "Yes?" Fumiko's voice came through the door, quiet. "Lunch preparations have begun. My aunt asked if you found anything." "Nothing yet," Kanzaki said truthfully. "But I am beginning to understand the room." A pause. Then, softer. "Are you afraid?" He considered. "No," he said. "But the room wants us to be." He slid the door open. Fumiko stood there, hands clasped, eyes searching his face. "People are talking," she said. "They're saying it's a spirit of the lake. Or a curse." "Stories fill gaps," Kanzaki said, "especially when truth hides." She nodded. "Yamane-san is angry. She says this kind of talk dishonors the inn." "And you?" Kanzaki asked. She hesitated. Then, "I think someone planned this." Kanzaki looked at her more closely. "You notice details," he said. She flushed slightly. "I work the front desk. Details are my job." "No," he corrected gently. "Not everyone sees the same ones." They walked together down the corridor. As they passed a lantern niche, Kanzaki stopped. The flame burned steady, almost proud. He leaned closer. The wick was trimmed cleanly. Too cleanly. "This lantern," he said. Fumiko followed his gaze. "The night watchman maintains them." "When?" Kanzaki asked. "Usually at dusk," she said. "Before guests settle in." Kanzaki straightened. "But someone adjusted this one later." Fumiko's brow furrowed. "Why would that matter?" "Because people who move in the dark like light," Kanzaki replied. "And people who plan do not trust flickering flames." They reached the main hall. Yamane stood near the storage doors, arms folded, expression tight. "Kanzaki-san," she said sharply, "you've been examining the room too freely." He bowed. "Only what the room allows." She scoffed. "Rooms don't allow anything." "No," Kanzaki said, "but people do." Yamane's gaze flicked to Fumiko, protective, then back to Kanzaki. "If you're implying one of us, I'm implying no one," Kanzaki interrupted softly. "Not yet." Silence stretched. Then Yamane turned away, muttering something about superstition and foolishness. Fumiko watched her go. "She's afraid." "So am I," Kanzaki said. She looked at him, surprised. "Of what?" she asked. Of a truth that solves the puzzle, he replied, but breaks something human in the process. The rain eased for the first time that day, just slightly, a thinning, as if the storm itself were listening. Kanzaki looked back toward the lakeside wing, toward Matsu-no-ma, where a room sat patiently, holding its breath. The lie had a shape now, and soon it would demand a name. Chapter 7. Voices After 11. The ryokan changed its sound after noon, not abruptly, not enough for most people to notice. But Kanzaki did. The rain thinned into a steady drizzle, and with it came voices, soft at first, then braver. Guests no longer whispered only behind sleeves. They leaned closer, asked questions that pretended to be polite conversation. Fear, Kanzaki knew, always searched for company. He sat in the corner of the main hall with a cup of tea, growing cold between his hands. From here he could see the corridor that led to the lakeside wing, the stairs and the garden beyond the paper windows. A good place to listen. Arakawa Shinzo provided the first performance. "I'm telling you," he said, loudly to no one in particular. "It wasn't the wind. Wind doesn't pace." Yamane passed behind him with a tray and did not stop. "I heard footsteps," Arakawa continued. "Back and forth, slow, like someone thinking too hard." Kanzaki raised his eyes. "Where were you at the time?" Arakawa grinned. "Ah, the quiet man speaks." "Please," Kanzaki said. "Just answer." Arakawa shrugged. "My room. Second floor, near the stairwell." "What time?" Kanzaki asked. "Little after 11, Arakawa said. "I remember because my drink was warm and that annoyed me." "Did you look outside?" Kanzaki asked. "No," Arakawa admitted. "But I listened." That shout, short, sharp, cut right through the rain. "A man's voice?" Kanzaki asked. Arakawa hesitated. "I thought so, or you wanted it to be," Kanzaki said gently. Arakawa frowned. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means," Kanzaki said, "that the human mind fills silence with meaning." Arakawa snorted and waved him off, already bored. Later, Kanzaki found the night watchman near the rear corridor, oiling a lantern hinge. "You passed the lakeside wing at 11:30, Kanzaki said. The man nodded, as always. "Did you stop?" Kanzaki asked. "No," he replied. "Nothing unusual." "No light?" Kanzaki pressed. "No shadows?" "No sound." The watchman shook his head. The storm was loud, but the corridor itself was empty. Kanzaki thanked him and moved on. Empty corridors meant nothing. Absence was only proof that someone had planned well. He found Fumiko near the front desk, sorting guest keys that no longer needed sorting. "People are choosing sides," she said quietly when he approached. "Some think the inn is cursed. Some think we're hiding something." "And you?" Kanzaki asked. She looked down at the keys. "I think Sakakibara-san didn't want to be found." Kanzaki studied her face. "Why?" he asked. "He asked too many careful questions," she said. "About locks, about patrols, about timing." She hesitated, then added, "And he watched the building, not the people." Kanzaki nodded. "So do I." A voice drifted from the far end of the hall. "I heard someone above my ceiling." Lady Tachibana Misako stood there, her lacquer box resting on a low table beside her. Kanzaki turned. "Above?" "Yes," she said. "Near midnight. Footsteps. Slow. Deliberate." "On the roof?" he asked. "Or inside it?" she replied. "Between ceiling and tiles." Fumiko inhaled softly. Misako continued, calm as ever. "It did not sound like panic. It sounded like purpose." Kanzaki bowed. "Thank you." When Misako left, Fumiko whispered, "Everyone heard something different." Yes, Kanzaki said, which means one thing was real. What? She asked. That someone moved, he replied, carefully enough that no one could agree on how. The storm had masked sound, the building had masked movement, and time had softened memory. Kanzaki walked again toward the lakeside wing. At the bend in the corridor, he stopped. There, on the floor near the wall, was a faint mark. Almost nothing. A darker line in the grain of the wood. Not mud. Water. Dried. As if something wet had passed through hours earlier, then vanished. Kanzaki did not point it out. Not yet. He straightened and continued walking, his footsteps unhurried, his face unreadable. The voices of the guests followed him like a low tide, rising and falling, each wave bringing a different story. Ghost. Kidnapping. Shame. Escape. All wrong. All circling something close. By evening, the ryokan no longer felt sealed by the storm alone. It was sealed by uncertainty. And in that closed world, Kanzaki Reijiro felt the truth drawing nearer. Not with force, but with patience, like rain finding a crack in old wood. Chapter 8. The Space Between Walls. Evening returned quietly. The storm did not end, it only lowered its voice. Rain tapped instead of struck. The lake beyond the windows was a sheet of moving shadow, its surface broken by small, endless rings. Kanzaki found Kobayashi Genzo behind the ryokan, beneath the overhanging eaves. The old handyman sat on a low stool, repairing a loose shutter hinge, with hands that moved from memory rather than sight. "You know this building better than anyone," Kanzaki said. Genzo did not look up. "I know where it complains." "That's the same thing," Kanzaki replied. The old man tightened the screw and wiped his fingers on a cloth. "If something is wrong, the building tells you. Creaks, drafts, places where the sound changes." "And hidden spaces?" Kanzaki asked. Genzo's hands paused. "There are no hidden spaces," he said flatly. Kanzaki waited. Rain slid down the roof tiles in thin lines. "There are only places no one looks anymore," Genzo added. Kanzaki stepped closer. "Behind the tokonoma in Matsu-no-ma." Genzo exhaled through his nose. "That panel was sealed years ago." "Sealed," Kanzaki echoed, "or simply left untouched." The old man stood slowly. His back protested, but he ignored it. "That passage was used during renovations," he said, "for wiring, for beams, nothing more." "Does it connect upward?" Kanzaki asked. Silence. Then quietly, "Everything connects upward if the building is old enough." Genzo turned away, already retreating into himself. Kanzaki did not push. That night, Kanzaki returned to Matsu-no-ma. Not alone. Fumiko knelt beside him as he lifted the tatami corner again. This time, he slid the wooden panel aside. Cool air breathed out. The space behind was narrow, unfinished. Dusty beams. Old wood darkened by time. Enough room for a man to squeeze through sideways. "It's like the inn has lungs," Fumiko whispered. "Yes," Kanzaki said, "and someone learned how to breathe through them." They did not enter. Instead, Kanzaki examined the edge of the panel. Scratches. Recent. "Someone practiced," he said. "Practiced what?" Fumiko asked. "Moving without leaving marks," he replied. "And without being heard." They replaced everything exactly as it had been. Later, in the corridor, they passed Yamane. She stopped when she saw their faces. "You found something," she said. "We found space," Kanzaki replied. Her eyes hardened. "This building is not a trick box." "No," Kanzaki said, "but it remembers when it was." Yamane looked away. Kobayashi should have told me if he didn't, Kanzaki said gently, because guilt is quieter than fear. That night, Kanzaki lay awake, listening. Rain, wood, distance. At precisely 11:15, a gust rattled the roof. He imagined a man moving then, not running, not rushing. Timing his steps with thunder, adjusting lantern light, closing a latch with a cord, leaving behind a version of himself. Kanzaki closed his eyes. This was not a crime of force. It was a crime of intention. And intention, once understood, always left fingerprints, even when hands were clean. Somewhere above the ceiling, the ryokan sighed, and the space between its walls kept its secret. For a little while longer. Chapter 9. What was left behind. Morning arrived, pale and uncertain. The storm had retreated into the lake, leaving the air washed thin and cold. From the veranda, Lake Biwa looked emptied of its anger, smooth and unreadable, like a face after a long argument. Matsu-no-ma was opened again. Kanzaki stood at the threshold, while Fumiko laid a cloth near the entrance, careful not to disturb anything. The room had not changed, but that, Kanzaki now understood, was the point. Everything is still here, Fumiko said softly. Yes, Kanzaki replied. Everything he wanted us to see. They began with the travel bag, folded clothing, spare sandals, a small toiletries kit. Nothing hurried, nothing missing. Kanzaki lifted the bag slightly. Too light. He didn't pack for a journey, Kanzaki said. He packed for a performance. The coat lay neatly by the wall, sleeves aligned. Kanzaki ran his fingers along the lining. Empty pockets. No wallet, Fumiko said. But it's on the desk. Yes, Kanzaki said, where it can be found. The wallet sat closed, modest. Inside, receipts, calling cards, a government employee's identification paper. All correct, all unhelpful. Kanzaki picked up the pocket watch. It was placed carefully atop a folded hand towel, the chain arranged in a deliberate curve. He did not wind it. The hands had stopped at 11:20. Fumiko's breath caught. That's when people said they heard. Time freezes easily, Kanzaki said, especially when someone wants it to. He returned the watch exactly as he found it. They moved to the closet. A faint smell lingered there, camphor mixed with something else. Fumiko frowned. The lake? Yes, Kanzaki said. Water that dried elsewhere. He knelt and examined the wooden floor beneath the hanging clothes. No stains, no drips. He dried himself, Kanzaki murmured, before stepping back into the building. Fumiko looked at him sharply. You think he went outside? I think he wanted us to believe he couldn't, Kanzaki replied. They sat back on their heels, letting the room settle again. Why leave everything? Fumiko asked. Why not take even one personal thing? Kanzaki considered. Because if even one thing vanished, he said, people would search for where it went. Fumiko nodded slowly. So he left us nowhere to look. Exactly. A sound came from the corridor, footsteps, brisk and controlled. Chio entered, her expression composed but strained. You've been in here long enough, she said. The guests are restless. Kanzaki bowed. I understand. She looked at the room, then away. Is this solvable? Yes, Kanzaki said. Her hands tightened in her sleeves. Quietly, he met her eyes. Truth is never quiet, he said. But it can be gentle. She closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them, something had shifted. Then do what you must, she said. Before rumor does it for us. After she left, Fumiko spoke. He cared about the inn. she said suddenly. Who? Kanzaki asked. Sakakibara-san, she said. He asked about reputation, about past guests, about what happens when stories spread. Kanzaki nodded. He wanted the building to survive him. They stepped outside onto the veranda. The rail caught the light at just the right angle. Kanzaki reached out and touched the splintered edge. The thread was gone. Fumiko noticed at once. It was here. Yes, Kanzaki said. And now it isn't. Someone removed it. No, Kanzaki said quietly. He did. She turned to him, confused. He's still close, Kanzaki continued, not in distance, but in time. The lake breathed below them. Somewhere beyond the ryokan walls, a man waited for the moment when disappearance became freedom. Kanzaki felt the final pieces begin to align, not as a picture, but as a decision. And decisions, he knew, were always heavier than facts. Chapter 10. The Shape of an Exit. By afternoon, the lake had turned silver. Clouds still hung low, but the light found its way through them in thin, careful bands. The ryokan breathed more easily now, as if relieved the storm had not taken anything else with it. Kanzaki walked with purpose. He did not return to Matsu-no-ma. Instead, he followed the building's spine, past linen rooms, storage alcoves, and a service corridor so narrow 2 people could not pass without turning sideways. This way, Fumiko said quietly, leading him toward the rear. The smell of damp wood deepened. They stopped at a plain wooden hatch set low into the wall, nearly invisible unless one knew where to look. Kanzaki knelt. His fingers traced its edge. Recent wear. This wasn't meant for guests, Fumiko said. No, Kanzaki replied. It was meant for repair. And for escape. He opened it just enough to look inside. A crawl space sloped upward toward the roofline, supported by beams blackened with age. It was tight, but passable. For someone careful. For someone determined. From here, Kanzaki said, he could move above the ceiling, reach the roof eaves, avoid the corridors entirely. And the lake? Fumiko asked. There's a covered stair, Kanzaki said. Old, for supplies. It descends outside the guest view. Fumiko swallowed. So he really could vanish. Yes, Kanzaki said, without being chased. They closed the hatch. As they turned back, they nearly collided with Genzo. The old handyman froze when he saw them there. You shouldn't be looking there, he said sharply. Kanzaki bowed. I understand why you didn't tell anyone. Genzo's shoulders slumped. I fixed that hatch years ago, he said. The latch was loose. I meant to report it. I didn't. And now? Kanzaki asked. Genzo looked away. Now a man used my silence. No, Kanzaki said gently. He used your memory. That night, Kanzaki gathered the guests, not formally, no announcements. Just tea in the main hall, Arakawa complained. Misako observed. Yamane stood rigid near the wall. Chiyo sat with her hands folded, listening. At 11:15, Kanzaki said, a man moved through this building. Arakawa scoffed. So he wasn't a ghost after all? No, Kanzaki replied. He was careful. He described the latch, the cord, the knot hole. Some guests laughed in relief, others frowned. You mean he locked it from the outside? Yamane said. Yes, Kanzaki replied, and then left in a way no one was watching. Chiyo's voice was calm. Why tell us this now? Because, Kanzaki said, the question is no longer how he vanished. He paused. It is whether we should drag him back. Silence followed. Rain began again, soft, almost respectful. Misako spoke first. If he wished harm, he would not have left so carefully. Arakawa scratched his head. He did leave me with a story, though. Kanzaki allowed himself the faintest smile. This was not a theft, he said. It was a retreat. Chio closed her eyes. When she opened them, the decision was already made. We will say, she said, that Sakakibara-jun departed before dawn. Yamane inhaled sharply. Chio continued, and that the storm confused the timing. Kanzaki bowed deeply. Fumiko felt something settle in her chest, not relief, but recognition. The truth had a shape now, and it was shaped like mercy. Chapter 11. When Truth Waits. Night returned with restraint. The storm did not come back. Instead, a thin mist rose from Lake Biwa and pressed gently against the ryokan, as if the water wished to listen. Lanterns glowed warmer than before, their light settling into corners that had been sharp the previous night. Kanzaki sat alone in the writing room, a low table before him, untouched tea cooling at his side. He had explained how. He had explained why. But explanations were not endings. They were only pauses where people decided what kind of silence they preferred. Footsteps approached. Fumiko entered, closing the door softly behind her. "They've stopped whispering," she said. "Now they're pretending nothing happened." Kanzaki nodded. "That is also a kind of fear." She sat across from him. For a moment, neither spoke. "Do you think he's safe?" she asked. "Yes," Kanzaki replied without hesitation. "He planned too carefully not to be." Fumiko folded her hands. "Then why do you look uneasy?" Kanzaki watched the lantern flame bend slightly with the air. "Because the solution is correct," he said, and still incomplete. She tilted her head. "You know where he went." "I know how he left," Kanzaki corrected. "Those are different things." Silence returned, heavier now. "Will you tell them?" Fumiko asked. Kanzaki met her eyes. What would that accomplish? She thought for a moment. "It would clear the inn. It would stain it," Kanzaki said gently, "with a story it doesn't deserve." Fumiko looked down. "My aunt chose mercy." "Yes," Kanzaki said, "and I must choose restraint." The door slid open again. Chiyo entered without ceremony. "Kanzaki-san," she said, "a message arrived." She held out a small envelope, its paper plain, slightly damp at the edges. No seal, no return name. Kanzaki took it slowly. Inside was a single sheet. No signature, no flourish. Only careful handwriting. "I am no longer within reach of the lake. Thank you for understanding the difference between disappearance and guilt. Please ensure the inn does not suffer for my choice." Kanzaki closed his eyes. Chiyo exhaled. "So it's done." "Yes," Kanzaki said. "He has crossed the final threshold." Fumiko leaned forward. "What about the documents?" Kanzaki turned the letter over. On the back was an address, partial, vague, intentionally outdated. "He has already passed them on," Kanzaki said, "to someone who can act without being seen." Chiyo straightened her back. "Then this matter ends here," she said. She bowed deeply, to Kanzaki, and then, unexpectedly, to Fumiko. "Thank you," she said. "Both of you." After she left, Fumiko remained seated, stunned. "She bowed to me," she whispered. Kanzaki smiled faintly. Recognition travels quietly. Later that night, Kanzaki walked the lakeside path alone. The water lapped gently against the shore. Somewhere far out, a bell sounded, perhaps from a fishing boat, perhaps from memory. He stopped near the covered stair, the one that had carried a man out of sight. "This was never about trickery," Kanzaki murmured to the dark. "It was about choosing which truth survives." He thought of his logic club days. Of puzzles with clean answers and applause at the end. This case had no applause, only balance. When he returned to the ryokan, Yamane stood waiting. "I misjudged you," she said stiffly. Kanzaki bowed. "That is allowed." She hesitated, then added, "And I misjudged him." "Yes," Kanzaki said. "So did he." Morning would come soon. Guests would leave. Stories would thin. But something had changed inside the old building, not in its structure, but in its memory. The ryokan had kept a secret. And Kanzaki Reijiro had learned that sometimes the highest form of deduction was knowing when not to speak. He paused at the threshold of his room and listened. No pacing, no whispers, only rain-free air and the slow, steady breathing of wood that had survived another night. The truth was solved and left exactly where it belonged. Chapter 12. The Weight of What is Known. The next morning arrived without ceremony. No storm, no mist thick enough to hide intention. Only pale winter light sliding across the tatami, touching the ryokan gently, as if apologizing for the night before. Kanzaki rose early. The inn was quieter than it had been since his arrival, not because people slept, but because they had decided to move on. Silence, chosen rather than imposed, carried a different weight. He washed his face at the basin, the water cold enough to sharpen thought, then stepped into the corridor. Somewhere down the hall, Yamane was already working. A broom whispered against the floor, erasing yesterday. In the dining room, Fumiko sat alone, sorting chopsticks she had already sorted once. "You're awake early," she said. "So are you," Kanzaki replied. She smiled faintly. Sleep felt unnecessary. They shared breakfast without rushing. Rice, miso, pickled vegetables. Ordinary things, grounding things. Kanzaki found himself grateful for the rhythm of it, the way daily life insisted on continuing, even after puzzles dissolved. "People will ask," Fumiko said at last. "Later, when you're gone." "Yes," Kanzaki said, "and they will answer each other." She glanced up. "You're leaving today?" "Yes." It was not a question. Chio joined them soon after, dressed formally, her posture exact. "The ferry resumes at noon," she said. "The road will follow by evening." Kanzaki bowed. "Then the inn breathes again." She hesitated, then said, "I have prepared something." From her sleeve, she produced a small envelope. Inside was payment, more than agreed upon. "I cannot accept this," Kanzaki said at once. "You must," Chio replied, "not for solving the mystery." She met his eyes. "For choosing how it ends." Kanzaki accepted with a bow. Later, as guests prepared to depart, Kanzaki walked the ryokan one last time. Matsu-no-ma stood open now, sunlight reaching all the way to the tokonoma. Without shadows, the room looked smaller, ordinary. That, Kanzaki thought, was its final disguise. He knelt and touched the tatami where it had once lifted. It lay flat now, cooperative, as if relieved. "You did well," he murmured. Not to the room, but to the man who had trusted it. Outside, Kobayashi Genzo waited by the tool shed. "I will repair the hatch properly," the old man said, before Kanzaki could speak. "And I will tell the next generation where it leads." Kanzaki nodded. "That is how buildings stay honest." Genzo hesitated. "Do you think he'll ever return?" "No," Kanzaki said, "but he may pass nearby again, just to see." Genzo looked toward the lake. "I would like that." As noon approached, luggage gathered near the entrance. Arakawa complained about delays. Misako thanked the staff with quiet sincerity, her lacquer box held carefully, no longer suspicious, only personal. When it was time, Kanzaki stood at the threshold. Fumiko walked him out. "You solved it," she said. "But you didn't use it." "That was the hardest part," Kanzaki admitted. She stopped, then bowed, deeply, formally, not as staff, but as an equal. "You treated me like a partner," she said. "No one ever has." Kanzaki returned the bow. "Because you were one," he said simply. The ferry horn sounded across the water. As Kanzaki stepped away, he did not look back at once. He waited until the dock creaked beneath his feet, until distance softened detail. Only then did he turn. The ryokan stood unchanged. Wood, paper, light. But it carried a secret now, not as a burden, but as a choice. It had survived. The boat pulled away. Lake Biwa widened. Kanzaki watched the shoreline recede and felt the familiar ache of resolution, the quiet sadness that followed every case where the answer had been correct, and still incomplete. Somewhere beyond sight, Sakakibara-jun walked under a different name. Somewhere behind him, a young woman stood taller at a front desk, and somewhere inside himself, Kanzaki Reijiro accepted a truth he had resisted for years, that justice was not always exposure. Sometimes it was containment. The ferry cut through the water, leaving a brief wake that vanished almost at once, like footprints in rain. Chapter 13. After the door is closed. The ryokan learned how to speak again. Not all at once. At first it was only small sounds, the scrape of getter on the threshold, the soft laugh of a maid in the kitchen, the kettle answering the fire. But by afternoon, the building had recovered its voice, and it spoke as it always had, quietly, politely, without explanation. Fumiko stood at the front desk alone. She straightened the guest ledger, though the names were already aligned. Outside, the ferry's wake had long since dissolved into the lake. Kanzaki was gone. She felt the absence like a missing step on a familiar stair. Yamane passed by with fresh towels and paused. "You should rest," she said, not unkindly. "You've been alert for days," Fumiko smiled. "I'm afraid if I stop, I'll start thinking." Yamane snorted. "That doesn't stop with age." She hesitated, then placed a folded cloth on the counter, one that had been kept aside since the storm. "From Matsu-no-ma," she said. "It no longer smells of lake water." Fumiko touched it lightly. Clean, ordinary. "Thank you," she said. Yamane nodded once and moved on. By evening, new guests arrived. Late, apologetic, grateful the ferry still ran. They asked about the storm, about delays, about rooms with a view. No one asked about disappearance. Chiyo watched from the inner corridor, her face composed. She had instructed the staff carefully. Facts were shared. Speculation was not. The inn would not lie. It would simply not elaborate. That night, Fumiko carried a lantern down the lakeside wing. Matsu-no-ma was empty now. The shoji door stood open, air flowing freely through the room. She stepped inside and sat near the tokonoma, listening. Nothing moved. And yet she felt it, the sense that something once held here had been released properly. Not broken free, not stolen away. Released. She thought of Kanzaki's hands, steady as he lifted the tatami. Of the way he listened, not only to words, but to what people avoided saying. For the first time, she wondered if she might leave someday. The thought did not frighten her. Across the lake, night settled. Far from the ryokan, Sakakibara-jun paused beneath a roadside pine and adjusted the strap of his bag. He no longer carried documents with official seals, only copies, reduced, anonymized, already mailed onward weeks before. He checked his watch. It ran again. He allowed himself a single breath of relief, then resumed walking. Not fleeing. Continuing. Back at the inn, Chiyo closed the account book for the month. The numbers were steady, reputation intact. But something else had shifted. She looked toward the front desk, where Fumiko now spoke confidently with a guest, answering questions without glancing for permission. Chiyo felt an unfamiliar warmth. Perhaps truth did not always arrive as disaster. Perhaps sometimes it arrived as trust. Late that night, rain returned, only briefly. A passing shower that darkened the wood and left the air fresh. The ryokan accepted it without complaint. Wood remembered water. Morning would come. Guests would come and go. And somewhere in the structure of the old building, in its beams, its crawl spaces, its carefully sealed doors, a story would remain, perfectly intact, because no one insisted on opening it again. Some truths, after all, were strongest when the door was closed from the inside. Chapter 14. What the Lake Remembers. Autumn arrived without asking permission. It came first to the lake, thinning the blue into steel, sharpening the mornings, teaching the wind to pause before it spoke. By the time the maples near the ryokan began to redden, the story of the storm had already softened into something else. Not forgotten. Settled. Fumiko noticed the change most in the guests. They no longer arrived with nervous glances at the lake or questions whispered behind sleeves. Instead, they commented on the quiet, on the age of the building, on how well the rooms seemed to hold them. "It feels safe here," one woman said, while signing the ledger. Fumiko bowed. "We try to keep it that way." She meant more than the words aloud. The ryokan had not changed its structure. The crawl spaces remained. The knot-hole still existed, unnoticed by those who did not know to look. The covered stair still descended toward the water. But now, those things felt complete, as if they had fulfilled their purpose and were content to rest. On a grey afternoon, a letter arrived. It bore no return address. The paper was thin, the ink careful, practiced in restraint. Chio read it alone. It contained no names, no dates, only confirmation. "The matter has been resolved quietly. No further inquiry will follow. Please consider this the end." She folded the letter twice and placed it in the bottom drawer of her desk, beneath old receipts and permits. She did not tell the staff. They did not need to know. Some endings did not belong to everyone. That evening, Fumiko and Yamane shared tea after the guests had retired. "You walk differently now," Yamane said, not looking up. Fumiko blinked. "Do I?" "Yes," Yamane replied. "Like someone who knows where the floor will creak and doesn't mind it." Fumiko smiled. "I learned from the building." Yamane grunted, but there was approval in it. "I was wrong," the older woman said after a moment, "about many things." Fumiko did not rush to answer. "That man," Yamane continued, "the one who left, I thought loyalty meant keeping doors closed." She looked at her hands. "Now I think it means knowing when to open them." Fumiko bowed her head. "I think Kanzaki-san would agree." Yamane snorted softly. "That awkward man?" "Perhaps." They drank in silence. Far away, Kanzaki Reijiro stood on a station platform, coat buttoned against the cold, watching steam rise from the tracks. He carried fewer cases now, fewer unsolved questions, but the case of Lake Biwa returned to him often, not as a puzzle, but as a sensation. The sound of rain on roof tiles, a latch sliding into place, a decision made without witnesses. He had written no report. There was nothing to submit. Instead, he carried the lesson quietly, like a stone warmed by the hand. On one such evening, he paused mid-step, struck by a thought he had avoided. If I had arrived one day later, he wondered, would it have mattered? The answer came easily. No. The disappearance would still have occurred. The ryokan would still have survived. The truth would still have chosen its own shape. He had not been the center of the story. He had only been present at the moment when it decided what it would become. Back at Lake Biwa, the first frost touched the veranda rail. Fumiko noticed it while sweeping. The wood caught the light differently now, each grain precise, honest. She stopped and looked out at the water. She imagined footprints dissolving, lanterns guttering out, doors closing softly behind those who knew how. For the first time, she felt no urge to explain what had happened. The ryokan didn't need defending. It needed living. That night, she opened the guest ledger to a fresh page. Her handwriting was steady. Outside, the lake reflected the moon, not as a mirror, but as a memory. And somewhere between water and wood, between truth and silence, the locked room ceased to be a mystery at all. It became what it had always been, a room with a door and the knowledge that not every exit is a loss. Chapter 15. The Quiet That Remains. Winter approached gently, not with snow at first, but with stillness. The lake no longer shifted its moods by the hour. It settled into long silences, broken only by the cry of distant birds and the slow knock of waves against the shore. The ryokan adjusted. Thicker futons, earlier lanterns. Tea kept warmer, longer. Fumiko learned the rhythm instinctively now. She no longer waited to be told when to step forward or when to recede. Guests noticed. Some commented on it. Others simply relaxed in her presence, as if the building itself had learned a new courtesy through her. One afternoon, as she was closing the shutters before dusk, she found herself standing before Matsu-no-ma. The room had been occupied many times since the storm. Ordinary travelers, an elderly couple, a poet who slept through dawn and complained about drafts. None of them felt watched. Fumiko slid the door open and knelt inside, not for work, but for herself. The tatami smelled faintly of straw and sun. The tokonoma held a seasonal scroll now, ink mountains fading into mist. Nothing about the room suggested mystery anymore. And yet, she remembered. She remembered how fear had filled it, how easily a story had grown teeth, how close the inn had come to being defined by something that was never truly its fault. She bowed once, to the room, to the memory, to the decision that had saved it. Then she stood and closed the door. In the city, Kanzaki Reijiro received a letter he did not expect. It was not from Lake Biwa. It was from a junior official, carefully worded, indirect, heavy with implication. An investigation had stalled. A trail had gone quiet. A set of documents had surfaced without a source. No request for help, only acknowledgement. Kanzaki folded the letter and burned it that evening, watching the paper curl inward as if relieved. He did not feel triumph, only confirmation. That night, he dreamed of corridors bending gently away from him, doors closing without sound. He woke calm. Some cases did not ask to be revisited. Back at the ryokan, Chio reviewed the year's accounts. They were better than expected. But more importantly, the staff no longer flinched when guests asked about the storm season. The story had lost its power. Yamane, once rigid, now laughed more often. Short laughs, but real ones. Kobayashi repaired what needed repairing and spoke openly of the building's age, no longer hiding its weaknesses. The inn had grown honest. Late one evening, after the last guest retired, Fumiko stepped outside alone. The lake lay dark and smooth. No wind, no rain. She thought of the man who had walked away into such a night, uncertain, burdened, but free enough to choose. She thought of the detective who had understood without demanding confession. And she thought of herself, standing here, no longer waiting for permission to exist fully within her own life. The lantern beside her flickered. She adjusted the wick, not too neatly, just enough. Balance mattered. As she turned back inside, the ryokan creaked softly, settling into sleep. No locked rooms, no vanished guests, only space, memory, and the quiet agreement to move forward. The lake accepted the night without reflection. And the truth, no longer sharp, no longer urgent, rested easily where it belonged. Not hidden, not displayed, simply allowed to remain. Chapter 16. When the Rain Ends. Spring returned to Lake Biwa without ceremony. It came first as scent, damp earth warming, wood releasing what it had held all winter. Then as color, faint at first, then certain. Plum blossoms near the service path opened before anyone thought to look for them. The ryokan accepted the season the way it accepted everything else. Quietly. Fumiko stood at the entrance that morning, brushing pollen from the wooden rail. The lake lay calm, wide and honest, reflecting nothing but sky. No mist, no storms waiting their turn. Guests arrived as they always had. They removed their shoes. They bowed. They breathed out. One man paused after signing the ledger. "There's something peaceful about this place," he said, "like it knows how to keep things." Fumiko smiled. "It's old," she replied. "Old things learn what matters." He laughed softly and followed Yamane down the corridor. Later that afternoon, Chiyo called Fumiko into the inner room. "I'll be traveling next month," she said, only briefly. Fumiko's hands stilled. "The inn will remain," Chiyo said calmly, "under your care." Fumiko looked up, startled. "You have already been doing it," Chiyo continued. "I am only making the truth official." For a moment, Fumiko could not speak. She bowed deeply. "I won't pretend to be you," she said at last. Chiyo smiled. "Good. Then the inn will continue to change." Far from the lake, Kanzaki Reijiro walked along a narrow road, lined with cherry trees, just beginning to scatter their petals. He carried no active cases, only a notebook, mostly empty. He stopped at a small shrine and stood listening to nothing in particular. The memory of the locked room came to him, not as tension, but as clarity. A man who chose disappearance, a building that allowed it, a truth that stayed intact because no one forced it into daylight. Kanzaki understood now what that case had been teaching him all along. Logic could solve puzzles, but compassion decided what survived the solution. He bowed once, to the road, to the season, to a lake he could not see. Back at the ryokan, evening lanterns were lit. Fumiko walked the corridors, touching door frames as she passed. The building responded in small ways, settling, breathing, accepting her weight as familiar. She paused before Matsu-no-ma. The room was occupied tonight by a young couple who laughed too loudly and apologized for it afterward. Their voices were warm, unafraid. Fumiko slid the door shut gently. The locked room no longer belonged to mystery. It belonged to life. Outside, rain began, not sudden, not heavy, just enough to darken the wood and release that old, comforting sound. Rain on tiles, rain on lake, rain that did not trap, but passed. Somewhere, a man walked under a different name. Somewhere, a detective refused to write a report. Somewhere, an inn kept a secret by no longer needing to protect it. The rain slowed, then stopped, and nothing more needed to happen. Because the story was not about disappearance. It never had been. It was about knowing when to leave, when to stay, and when to close a door, not to hide the truth, but to let it rest.